Welcome to this explainer. When we hear Renaissance, we usually picture, breathtaking paintings, grand statues, and a glorious artistic rebirth. But today, we're diving into the source material to uncover something much more fascinating. We're going to deconstruct the Italian Renaissance as a ruthless, highly efficient economic and political engine. This is really a story about the complex power of city-states and how they literally built the modern world. Think about the massive contrast here. While the rest of Europe was pretty much locked into rural feudalism, kings and lords sitting in stone castles, deriving all their power from land, Italy was exploding as an urban frontier. It was an environment driven by merchants, by bankers, and the rapid flow of hard coin. This wasn't just a lifestyle shift, it was a completely new operating system for society. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the rise of city-states, the economic wealth engine, politics, power, and republics, navigating the social ladder, and finally, culture as political currency. Part 1. The rise of city-states, focusing on disruption and demographics. All of this started with a profound tragedy. A staggering 2/3 of the Western European population was wiped out by recurring plagues. Just pause to consider the grim scale of that. It created an intensely acute labor shortage right across the continent. But that demographic shock acted as a massive catalyst. With so few workers left, the folks who survived could suddenly demand much higher pay and even private land ownership. It effectively broke the back of the whole feudal aristocratic model. Over in Italy, this vacuum shifted immense power to a rising mercantile class. They basically seized control, forming autonomous urban communes, completely free from the old bishops and rural counts. In the wake of all that shifting power, the Italian peninsula fragmented into a fiercely competitive arena. After decades of messy coalitions, a fairly stable system popped up, dominated by 5 major players. You had the Kingdom of Naples down south, the sprawling papal states in the middle, and then the incredibly wealthy hubs of Florence, Milan, and the maritime empire of Venice up north. They were locked in this constant, edgy rivalry. Because any 3 of them could team up to block the other 2, nobody could totally take over. It was basically a 15th century version of modern geopolitical deterrence. Moving on to part 2, the economic wealth engine, capitalism and commerce. Our sources describe Florence as a frontier state. Honestly, it's best to think of it as the Silicon Valley of the 15th century. It was an absolute crucible for rapid innovation, intense competition, and it had a highly strategic geographic position sitting right between East and West. It wasn't just a city. It was a high-speed incubator for early capitalism. And the sheer diversity of their wealth engine is incredible. They didn't just invent modern banking and float credit to European monarchs. They built a massive international supply chain. Picture this: Florentine merchants importing raw, high-quality English wool, treating it with brilliant dyes sourced all the way from Asia, and then manufacturing this incredibly luxurious cloth that they turned around and exported across Europe. This loop of manufacturing and trade pumped immense wealth directly into the city. This commercial revolution completely flipped the traditional social order. Almost overnight, you've got these urban patriarchs, guys with ink-stained hands holding cold, hard coin, who are suddenly vastly wealthier than the old land-holding aristocrats stuck out on their impoverished rural estates. Money, trade, and luxury goods, that was the brand new foundation of power. All right, part 3. Politics, power, and republics, a web of jurisdictions. Now, governance in these city-states, it was not simple. There was no absolute ruler pulling every single string. Instead, it was a chaotic, fluid web of overlapping authorities. You had city councils trying to keep the lights on and provide services, while powerful professional guilds wielded immense political clout just by regulating trade. At the exact same time, you've got bishops' courts judging morality and marriage, plus state magistrates swooping in for special cases. They were all constantly elbowing each other for control. It was basically like a hostile corporate takeover where the board of directors, the legal team, and the local union are all trying to run the company at the exact same time. To survive this insanely cutthroat environment, these republics essentially had to invent modern statecraft. They pioneered resident ambassadors and advanced espionage networks just to keep tabs on their rivals. And internally, to stop any single family or faction from getting too powerful, they used incredibly brief political terms. We are talking offices that lasted maybe 3 to 6 months. It's wild. They even used these ridiculously complex lotteries and nomination systems just to block backroom deals. It was basically their deep-seated paranoia and rivalry channeled directly into municipal law. Part 4. Navigating the social ladder. The new elite. So, who were the absolute rulers of this new world? The patricians. They were a hybrid class formed when the old noble families, the magnates, merged with the newly wealthy merchants and banking families. Together, they formed this super powerful, exclusive commercial elite. And the second they were in charge, they rewrote municipal statutes to make sure they monopolized all the major public offices. It's like a corporate board completely rewriting the bylaws so they can literally never be outvoted. The data shows us a pretty stark reality about the Renaissance social ladder. Sure, just below the patricians, there was a large class of artisans and guild members who lived fairly comfortable lives and actually had some real political power. That was a huge deal compared to the rest of Europe. But the inequality? It was staggering. The patrician upper class controlled hundreds of times more wealth than the massive lower class of semi-skilled workers and the urban poor. For that bottom tier, the Renaissance barely even happened. The crucial takeaway here is that while the city-state initially looked like this brilliant escape hatch from rigid feudal rules, it didn't stay open for long. Early on, sure, social mobility was surprisingly high. Talent and commerce could really elevate you. But by the late 15th century, the patricians had locked in their privilege. They arranged marriages strictly within their own circle and essentially pulled the social ladder up right behind them. Which brings us to a really fascinating turning point in our explainer. It prompts a vital question. If these cities were run by ruthless, hyper-pragmatic bankers, entirely obsessed with wealth, inequality, and cutthroat politics, why on earth did they pour unprecedented fortunes into public art, painting, and architecture? And that leads us to Part 5, Culture as Political Currency, the Art of Power. The answer is that art during the Renaissance was never just about aesthetics. It was deployed as high-stakes political currency. Families like the Medici in Florence didn't just fund art out of personal vanity. They used patronage as a calculated, strategic investment. By pumping their banking wealth directly into the city's cultural capital, they were validating and legitimizing their own immense political and economic dominance. Just look at the tools of this cultural propaganda. They funded humanist universities and libraries, deliberately reviving ancient Greek and Roman heritage and welding it to their modern civic culture. They built grand, classical architecture with perfect linear perspective and expansive public piazzas. They bankrolled massive public spectacles, festivals, carnivals. They were actively rewriting the physical and intellectual landscape of the city to project dominance, stability, and civic pride. They made themselves entirely indispensable to the state. Ultimately, this is a narrative of how a city used its wealth not just to make its streets and churches look pretty, but to completely redefine the very essence of civilization. The art we admire today, that was the physical manifestation of a highly complex, urban power engine. Which leaves us with one final thought to ponder today. If this 15th century engine, an engine of massive wealth generation, stark social inequality, overlapping jurisdictions, and the strategic weaponization of culture and art, if that birthed the very concept of the modern city, are we still just running on that exact same blueprint today? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to step outside and look at the cities around you with a completely fresh set of eyes.